You have witnessed the 7-year saga between Michael the Superbacker and the Air Umbrella. You have seen the true miracle that is the N99 mask that can practically suffocate you in no time. Let me introduce you to the newest success to be in the crowdfunding sphere. Northern Pacific Airways. A few days ago, I was just randomly browsing through Flyer Talk forums like a totally sane, rational person would do at 3:30 a.m. at night, and I came across this random thread. It talks about this airline called Northern Pacific Airways that is about to start a crowdfunding campaign. And I was very surprised. Last time this was done by any major airline startup was by this good, reputable, honest airline called Baltia. They have been trying to launch operations since the early 1990s, and I'm pretty sure they are gonna start anytime now. Right? Anytime now. And today, after taking a deeper look of Northern Pacific Airways' plan to connect Asia with North America, I can tell you that it will not work without some major modifications to their plan. And as a professional flight hacker and a board-certified Asian, I will try to explain why. And let's take a deeper look of the pitch they have outlined in the crowdfunding campaign webpage. And the first thing that you're going to notice is that they are trying really hard to copy the successful model of Icelandair. And if you have paid any attention behind me, you're going to notice I really like Iceland, and I've flown Icelandair a few times. And I can tell you that why Icelandair's model is not going to work for Northern Pacific Airways. The first thing is that both Icelandair and Copa they are trying really hard to copy here used to be large national flag carriers. That means they had quite a lot of regional backing from the government, and they have a lot of financial reserve in case anything fails. So that is exactly why Icelandair has been so aggressive at launching new routes. In pre-pandemic years, they have been launching all kinds of routes into small Midwest towns in order to experiment which markets are more profitable. And for them, it is okay to lose a few dozen million in the new routes that failed as an experiment because they can just quietly cancel the routes next year and then start anew with a new experiment. But for a startup like the MPA, they have almost no opportunity to fail twice or thrice in a row without going into bankruptcy. So that is a very dangerous proposition. And the second thing is that the distance between the markets that Icelandair and Copa are trying to serve are much closer together than the market that Northern Pacific is trying to do. This is because most of the European as well as North American cities are about 4,000 to 4,500 miles apart, while all of the North American and South American cities that Copa are trying to serve are about 3,000 miles apart. But every single route that you can fathomably think Northern Pacific Airways can competitively participate in are more than 6,500 miles away. And that means the fuel burn is going to be much more significant for MPA than Icelandair and Copa combined. And let's not forget that Icelandair has to sacrifice a lot in order to build this model. In order to have all of the flights arriving and departing around the same bank, they have to utilize their aircraft extremely poorly. Sometimes some of their planes will be parked at outstations for more than 20 hours each day. And that resulted in huge losses in revenue because if an airplane is not flying, it is costing you a lot of money in parking fees. And that can potentially be remedied by Icelandair's large scale, but for a small startup like Northern Pacific Airways, they surely are gonna lose a lot of money on routes like these. And let's not forget that both Icelandair and Copa are the only major carriers present at their own hub. If you need to fly into Panama City or Reykjavik, your only option usually is Icelandair or Copa. And that means they suffer almost no competition. But for Northern Pacific Airways, Alaska is a completely different beast, and any airline from US can easily set up a new base in Alaska just to compete with Northern Pacific Airways. And I can see that in Q&A section, the CEO has come out and defended their position by claiming that the only way these airlines can compete successfully with them on this model is to set up a major base in Alaska, which is kind of difficult for them to do. But I really don't know if you have heard of this airline that is kind of big in Alaska called, what's its name? Alaska Airlines. Yeah, they have the biggest base in Anchorage, they have the most staff, they have the best maintenance facilities, they have the best route network. So if this model is ever remotely close to successful, guess what? Alaska Airlines is gonna jump in with some wet leased 787s and they're gonna compete you out of the market. And another interesting fact that a lot of people seem to ignore is that the bilateral demand between Europe and North America is very strong. A lot of Europeans speak decent English and they always dream about visiting the United States and in Canada. While a lot of the North Americans always think about Europe as the more sophisticated, really historical continent that they always want to go. So there's quite a lot of demand and leisure side on both sides. While for Asia, it's not as much of a case. Most of the Asians do not speak English well enough, so visiting North America may be a group endeavor that can be a once-in-a-lifetime issue. While for the young North Americans, going to Japan and Korea is all of the new craze these days, it is much more intensive in planning compared to going to Europe. So it is more like I've been looking forward to this for years, rather than, oh, I go to this place in Italy with my bestie Jessica every single spring break, that kind of thing. So that is why this might not be a parallel comparison between Northern Pacific Airways and Icelandair, as the market is very different. And not to mention, the biggest addressable market is China. And China has a lot of visa restrictions. Most of the North Americans going to China would require a multiple-week formal visa application, and it's vice versa, the same for the Chinese as well. So this market is much more limited than you would otherwise think. And I saved the best argument for the last. This might be the major reason why I think the Icelandair model will not work for the trans-Pacific travel. You see, if you're operating transatlantic like Icelandair does, you are pretty much secured, right? In the ways that all of your competitors are large international conglomerates that operate at the basis of turning a profit. That means all of their flights need to be priced reasonably enough so they eventually at least break even, right? But if you're playing in the trans-Pacific sectors, all of your competitors are actually owned by the government and they do not care if they lose money. You see, all of the major one-stop option offered before pandemic are operated by China Eastern, Air China, as well as China Southern. These are actually backed by the local regional government of Shanghai, of Beijing, and of Guangzhou. They are not actually in the airline business, they are in the PR business. They're operating at a significant loss for each flight so they can boost their city's image and offer people a window into China. So for them, they don't really care if they lose a lot of money. But if you are a private entity trying to basically compete with them as a one-stop option into a larger city in Japan and Korea, you almost have no chance of turning any reasonable profit. And that is why I think you should not be competing in the Trans-Pacific sector if you are anywhere near a low-cost model, because you are not only competing with other private entities, you are also competing with regional governments in China and a lot of other places. That is not a good sign. And now we move on to the next slide where they talk about their fleet. And this is where I see that these are a bunch of businessmen running an airline instead of a bunch of airmen running a business. You see, they just simply copied Icelandair's model of operating almost all 757-200s without understanding why this kind of business model worked for them. 757-200s are very, very inefficient. They are very good workhorses, don't get me wrong. The Flying Pencil is one of the best aircrafts ever built, but that means they are very over-engineered, and over-engineered means they are inefficient in the modern aviation world. And that just basically tells you all of the story. And not to mention, 757 has stopped production a long time ago. All of the 3 aircrafts they have acquired so far are more than 27 years old. They are older than me, and I know how to operate a fax machine. Oh, for the Zoomers out there, a fax machine is basically a printer but for Snapchat before Snapchat existed, okay? And it was pretty lit AF. What does that even mean? And being old birds means that they are also very heavy, because they are built with a structured design as well as the materials from the late 1980s. So they definitely cannot compete with any airliners these days. And also, if you take a look of the manuals and the procedures they have outlined into acquiring one of their aircrafts, they outline that they are going to install in-flight entertainment system. And that is a big red flag for me, because in-flight entertainment systems are very heavy, because you need to install screens and systems and the computers onto every single seat. And that can potentially add a lot of weight into these already very heavy airplanes. So the fuel burn is gonna be quite heavy. And not to mention, the range 757-200s offer is not very sufficient. As you can see here, all of the places that this plane can reach is some parts of northeastern China and Korea and Japan. And that means they have no feasible way of even reaching the big financial hubs such as Shanghai, Taipei, Singapore, and Hong Kong, or the big leisure hubs such as Manila and Bangkok. And that is a very bad sign, because if you are only aiming for Japan and Korea, why are you advertising that you are basically aiming for the $20 billion Trans-Pacific market in the next slide? That simply just does not make sense because most of the tourism into Asia are actually not into Japan and Korea, but much further south into Southeast Asia. So I really don't know why they are addressing the $20 billion market when I think at most your feasible market is 10% or even less, 5% of that. And based on my 10% estimation, take a look of their financial calculation. They think that they will reach $1.6 billion by the end of the decade, which is almost 70% or 80% of the market that I think they can feasibly achieve, which is simply untrue. This is physically not possible. So I really don't know what kind of audience they are addressing to, because anyone with half a brain would know that this is simply shooting for way too high. There's no way they can reach even remotely close to $1 billion by the end of 2030. And on this slide, they claim that they are planning a venture that allows the business people from both sides to meet in the middle in Alaska. And for that, I was first very confused because I thought you're operating on a low-cost model in order to cater to the leisure crowd for tourism or VFR, visiting family and relatives, but now you're also aiming for the business crowds? But nah, let's disregard that and see why this plan would not work. The first thing is that halfway of 14 hours is still 7 hours each way for both parties. So yeah, instead of allowing one side to fly 14 hours directly to the other side, now both sides have to suffer together. And the second thing is that if I am a Chinese conglomerate leader and I want to take a team and visit you guys in the United States, I still need to go through the rigorous process of applying for a US business visa. So that is why I think this meet in the middle model might not work as well as they think. And here comes the part that can potentially trap the most people who are not familiar with the aviation industry. That is the timing section. You see that every single point that they have listed here is kind of just not correct. The first thing, talking about decreased operating costs for the pandemic, has basically largely disappeared within the span of a few months because there's a huge pilot shortage. A lot of the airlines are paying extra just to make sure that the pilots do not leave for another competitor. And that means the operating costs are going sky high. And the second thing about landing slots is almost never a problem in Anchorage, which is extremely overbuilt. And the third part about reopening demand, that part can potentially be right, but it really depends on the geopolitics. And the last thing about increased fuel prices is also something that we already talked about. 757-200s burn way too much fuel, and all of the savings that you can potentially have by flying a one-stop option is almost mitigated by this heavy bird. And finally, let's take a look of its reward structure since it is a crowdfunding after all. What do I get for each tier I have pitched in order to start this airline? Whoa, you're offering vouchers worth the full value of your investments? I don't know, but that sounds too good to be true, right? You donate $1,000 and you get $1,000 back? And according to your Q&A section, it is also fully transferable. That means I can actually sell it. So basically I invest $1,000, I get $1,000 back in the secondary market, and then I simply need to withdraw. Oh, that's why. Yeah, this airline is not gonna fly, is it? Or if it's gonna fly, I'm not gonna get my investment back until 2037, perhaps? Well, let's keep looking. Whoa, you're giving more and more in terms of vouchers, and what? What is this? A #1 status? Like, you never talk about your frequent flyer program, and now you're giving me a status that I don't even know what it is as a reward for donating that much money?
You serious?
And #5 is what? You can paint an aircraft? Oh, that's so good. Okay, anyone has $5 million to spare, so I can basically paint the entire airplane into a Nyan cat. Yeah, I'm that old school. No? Okay, fine. How about $500,000 so I can name this Dash 8 into Cockmaster 69? No? No? No takers?
They ask you how you are, you just have to say that you're fine when you're not really fine, but you just can't get into it.
Now we have established the fact that Northern Pacific Airways has chosen a fleet that is not very well suited for the model they are trying to copy from. And also, the Icelandair model that they are trying to copy from does not work very well for the Trans-Pacific sector. And additionally, the target audience they are trying to aim for is murky at best. And also, the timing is not as good as they claim. So what can we do now to fix it? Well, the first thing I need to address is that if I have that much money, I would never start an airline these days because the geopolitical tension as well as the market is very unstable. So starting an airline is basically like gambling away your money in Las Vegas. You can get lucky, but the chance is quite low. But if you have a gun pointed at my head, I guess I have to do some fixing, right? So the first thing I would do is actually swap out the aircrafts. Introducing A321XLR. It is better than 757-200 in almost every single regard. It has better fuel burn, it has better fuel capacity, it has a longer range, it can carry almost the same amount of people, or you can adjust it to carry fewer people, so it's easier to fill up the airplanes. It's easier to find a pilot who can pilot an A320 family aircraft than 757. It also just has easier maintenance and the newer technologies overall, right? It's a brand new airplane that's about to come up in the next few years. The only downside is that it's a little bit more expensive. Okay, much more expensive than getting a used aircraft on its way to the scrapyard. But if you're really serious about building an airline, this should be the last of your concern because almost your entire overhead is your fuel. And the second point is that maybe instead of advertising yourself as an airline that can connect the big cities within North America, because I can see that they are trying to fly to Los Angeles, to San Francisco, and to Tokyo and so on the other side, maybe try to go into smaller markets, right? So instead of recommending cities such as Tokyo and Osaka to the American weebs, try to say that, hey, maybe you should go to this really interesting city called Kumamoto, right? They have a bear as their mascot and they are very famous. And as for the fourth point of recommendation, I would recommend doing the opposite for the Japanese and the Koreans because let's be frank, okay? Tucson is a hard sell no matter what. We really need to think about what kind of thing you can offer as an Alaska airline to the Japanese, right? They have a lot of one-stop option to New York, one-stop option to Los Angeles, but they have no option of a non-stop option to Alaska. So instead of branding yourself as the Icelandair of Pacific, brand yourself as the Alaska airline that can take you directly from Asia to Alaska. And the last point of fixing I have recommended for the Northern Pacific Airways is also, I think, the most drastic. But I think it is also the final evolution of all of the previous points I have pointed out, and it can potentially be extremely profitable. What I mean is that you should operate like a Neos-like fashion. Neos Airlines is one of those Italian leisure airlines that operate some of the most obscure routes I have outlined here in this video, talking about some of the weirdest flight routes that are currently operating. And I think it can potentially be a very good idea for Northern Pacific Airways. So for example, when China finally reopens, right, you launch flights directly, go full out from Fairbanks and Anchorage into markets such as Changchun, Jilin, Harbin, or any other city within your aircraft's reach in northern China. Why would you do that? Because a lot of Chinese have really good impressions of what Alaska is supposed to be like, and they really want to go see the Aurora Borealis. So what the airline needs to do is simply operating a weekly flight from these tiny cities into northern Alaska or perhaps Anchorage. Think about these. These are tiny cities that you may have never heard of as a North American viewer, but actually each one of these cities I've mentioned, the Changchun, Jilin, and Harbin, these are all bigger than San Francisco. If you do your marketing right, almost all of these people want to go into Alaska once in their lifetime, and suddenly you can have a much bigger audience than you can ever get. Instead of getting 0.5% of this $20 billion pie, why don't you just get 100% of this $1 billion pie? So this is the current situation of the first international major airline crowdfunding in world history. And no, Baltia doesn't count. Back in the days, they were still using fax machines. Who uses fax machines anyway, right? Am I right? Haha, right, fellow Zoomers? No? No? Anyone there? No? Okay, yeah, but I still think that the Northern Pacific Airways business model would not succeed in the long run without some major changes to their plans. And yeah, it just seems like a bunch of businessmen decide to come together and start an airline because it sounds like the cool new hip things to do. And also to their monkey brains, you know, things go fast, noom, noom, zoom, zoom. That sounds really cool, right? And don't get me wrong, look at this mug. I don't know if you haven't noticed, I might be one of the biggest beneficiaries if there's ever a low-cost, consistent budget airline across the Pacific. But there's no way in my logical mind I can even remotely fathom how they're gonna turn a profit in the long run. So yeah, I wish them best of luck, and if they ever actually launch flights into Asia, I will actually try to be on one of the earlier flights, using my own hard-earned cash, of course. And now the only thing they need to do to entice me is perhaps a nice frequent flyer program that is really rewarding. that can be real, right? Like, Oh, come on. There's no way this is like they are serious about that, right? Like it's just that's just a hip name, business buzzwords that's floating around these days, you know. They just really want to be branded themselves with like the kids, you know, right? Right? Like there's no way they want to associate themselves with like those scams, those rug pulls, those human tragedies, or you know, yeah, right, like all of those diminishing values, you know, dropping 99% every day. Like, come on, there's no way they want to do that, right? Come on, CEO sir, you can explain away. Come on, explain away.
And then we really believe our transformative attitude towards airline loyalty using cryptocurrency will bring a big following until then the other airlines end up copying that as well.
In my signals, you were safe. We slowed right down.
She would be on missing persons list.
So I'm going to look out for myself and not do that.
Hot dog!
Sorry. My mind just decided to leave this corporeal domain for a hot second for some unknown reason, but I'm mostly fine now, hopefully. Yeah, I really need to thank you for watching today's video because it took me a lot of effort to make. So if you would like to hit the like button beneath me, that would really help me out. And also, I do have to apologize as this video is supposed to come out on a completely different date. You see, the private round of fundraising they are gonna have is supposed to end on June 1st. So I want to delay writing the script until at least June 1st so I can see how much money they have raised. But apparently they have postponed the public round by another 2 days. So that is why I decided to forego that completely. But if you want to check how much money they have raised so far, maybe you can click the link down below in the webpage I have linked in the first comment, and you can see how much money they are raising. But I'm pretty sure they're not gonna fly soon. But in the case they do fly, I would recommend you to subscribe to my channel because I'm definitely gonna give a review of this airline as soon as possible. But also, you know, if you want to check out some of the other aviation or travel hacking or simply just travel related vlogs I have on my channel, I've produced quite a lot of them, and you can see beside me, yeah, they are really interesting, trust me. Some of them are really good. And subscribe as well if you want to check out some of those others, and I'll see you around, okay?